Watching Beyond the Headlines, Global Affairs Analyst by Olowo-Ake, thank you so much for staying the course on the program this hour. You were talking about the ripple effect of the Middle East crisis on the sub-region. You can take it up from there.
Yes, absolutely. I was saying that the major actors themselves recognize that this is not a conflict that should be allowed to fester. You would notice that, of course, the US made some strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites and immediately also declared, rather interestingly, that it wasn't a party to the conflict. And today we started hearing of a ceasefire that had apparently been negotiated by President Trump. The truth is that the protagonists are extremely well armed. And not only are they well armed, they are also extremely well connected within the international system to the effect that they could easily draw in states on either side of the conflict. And we're beginning to see coalitions beginning to build and form around Israel and Iran. So it was good news to hear that some sort of ceasefire was already being contemplated, because this is not a conflict that should be allowed to either continue or to expand. To that extent, I feel that this is reassuring. I also do not think that Israel and Iran can endure extensive armed conflict. Their economies cannot sustain such conflict, especially Israel, that has been at war with in several theaters in the last couple of months. So with regard to how this could impact us in West Africa, I think essentially it could be in the area, for instance, of our own attempts to deal with insurgencies and terrorism, which is plaguing the Sahel and the Lake Chad regions. Recall that most of the systems, the equipments, and the devices that we are acquiring or have acquired to be able to respond to these threats either come from Russia or China or the United States or Israel. So if there's a major conflict, these powers are likely to ignore our own part of the world and to focus on what is unfolding in the Middle East. And that could have implications for our own ability, to deal with the threats we face, either in terms of acquiring new platforms or sourcing spare parts and equipment for existing systems that we have acquired. There's also the risk that if it continues, it might suck us as well into the conflict, by way of some countries in Africa or our region providing support, diplomatic or otherwise, for the protagonists. So these are two very clear ways, in which a continuation of this conflict could negatively impact our sub-region and, in fact, our continent. So one would hope and expect that the two protagonists will come to an agreement, will start taking steps to diffuse the tension and to cease fire.
Absolutely. It's just that following, President Trump's assurance of a permanent peace deal, there have been reported attacks on both sides, and even the U.S. president himself has shown some frustration in that regard. We have to go now, but there are a lot of talk about the fragile security landscape across the Sahel. In a minute, if you can, explore for us whether or not you see this further weakening West Africa's already fragile peace efforts, where you consider the issue with Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and the struggle of the regional authority itself.
There's a risk that could happen. And if I quickly use the example of Russia and Ukraine, you remember that some months ago, the Ukrainians even publicly announced that they were part of an ambush against Malian forces and the Africa Corps, which is the successor body to PMC Wagner, in an encounter that took place on the borders with Algeria. Ukraine decided to go after Russia in other parts of the world as a consequence of the war which is going on between her and Russia. So if we see this kind of tendency on the part of the two protagonists, they might want to exploit our own context, to deal a blow to their adversary within this region. And this is why one would hope, like I said before, that this conflict comes to an immediate halt and that steps be taken to ensure lasting
Indeed.
resolution. Because the ceasefire which has been arranged is simply because the interest of the U.S., you remember U.S. base in Qatar was threatened,
That's right.
and then of course Israel. This just cannot continue,
All
and
right.
the powers recognize that. So they're
All
just
right.
trying to put a stop to this.
Indeed.
But in the deal that has been worked out, we haven't seen anything concrete to suggest that a permanent resolution of the
All right.
conflict is being addressed. They just want a temporary ceasefire.
Good place to leave it. Thank you so much for your contribution, Mr. Bayo Olowo-Ake, on the show.
Thank you for having me.